Hey, what's ready? Welcome back to News Dose. And I think by this point, we can pretty definitively say that PlayStation made a major mistake. Years ago, they acquired Bungie in a multi-billion-dollar buyout, which at the time, I thought was a little questionable. But I still wanted to see how it would play out just because Bungie historically has been one of the most successful multiplayer studios of all time. I think for me, though, my concern more so came from the amount of money that Sony acquired them for, because billions of dollars just did not feel right for this studio, and really just one singular franchise that seemed to have its best days behind it. Well, Sony has officially spoken out about Bungie, and yeah, it definitely seems like they have some regrets, which we're going to get into today. Then after that, we're going to talk about Nintendo and why everybody is just furious with them at the moment. As always, though, first, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's go get right into things, though, starting off with Xbox and Nintendo's Reggie Fils-Aimé. Obviously, he left Nintendo years ago, but, when he talks, people still listen. And recently, he questioned Xbox's commitment for the Switch 2, or at least early on, which, I find his opinion to be a little perplexing. I'll come back to that here in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at his exact quote. He said, "I'm surprised that Xbox has not yet fully embraced Switch 2 from a software perspective. Certainly some games could easily be ported over to Switch 2, and I'm surprised that we haven't seen more of that. I thought there would be much more, especially during this time frame leading into the holiday. All through the fall, I was fully expecting some dedicated announcements, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened." Now, personally, and this is just my own opinion, but I feel like this response is a little tone deaf of what's actually happening, because we have heard time and time again, Nintendo have been slow to give out Switch 2 dev kits. So in other words, Nintendo has been an issue, at least early on, as to why third-party support across the board, not just with Microsoft, but across the board, has been slow out of the gate. Now, I'm sure Nintendo has their own reasons for their limited access early on. I'm not going to get into all of that in today's video, but at the end of the day, I fully expect third-party support to pick up potentially in 2026, including from Microsoft as well. Back in 2024, Nintendo listed Microsoft as an official Switch 2 partner, and for that matter, they have a contract for Call of Duty support for the next 10 years. So my response to Reggie is that it's really more of a matter of when rather than if. It's going to happen at some point, even if it's slow at first, and when it does happen, we'll probably hear about multiple games, including the likes of Sea of Thieves. Now, we also got a glimpse into what the rumored Valve Controller 2 will look like. It's been pretty well documented that this thing does in fact exist, and Bradley Lynch over on Twitter X posted an AI photo of what it will look like, as you can see here. Now, this thing might look a little bit strange at first if you've never used the previous Valve controller, but I can tell you firsthand why so many people want this thing, and that's because the original Valve controller to this day is actually a really good and unique controller that really hasn't been properly replicated or even improved upon these past 10 years. I still have mine. It's right next to me, in fact, and what's so good about it is that it makes PC games that are, a little bit better suited for a mouse feel a bit better on controller because of its trackpads. Those trackpads are honestly amazing, and it's also just a highly customizable controller. You can either customize it yourself, or, Steam just has all kinds of community settings for individual games that you can apply to it on the fly. And when I saw this new design, there are some improvements that I like about it, but at the same time, I do also have some concerns as well. So first off, the trackpads are smaller than the original controller, more in line with what they look like on the Steam Deck. And personally, I'm not necessarily convinced by that just yet. I do, however, like the idea of them including 2 analog sticks as opposed to just 1, like we got on the original. I think that'll immediately make it into a much more versatile controller. But again, I do question their placements. They are fairly high on the controller, which could ultimately make it uncomfortable. But at the same time, if you look at the Steam Deck, there was actually similar concerns about it before it released, but then when consumers actually got it into their hands, I mean, it was pretty universally praised for how comfortable it actually is. So even if this controller might look a little bit strange and maybe some of the placements look a little off, I do still trust Valve, and I'm always going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I just hope we get an official announcement sooner rather than later. All right, so let's just go talk about Sony, though, and their Bungie acquisition, because they are officially having some buyer's remorse. Sony CFO in a recent earnings call said that regarding Destiny 2, partially due to the changes in the competitive environment, the level of sales and user engagement have not reached the expectations we had at the time of the acquisition of Bungie. While we will continue to make improvements, we downwardly revised the business projections for the time being and recorded an impairment loss against a portion of the assets at Bungie. And it's kind of shocking to hear something like that after they spent billions of dollars buying them out. I mean, we're talking about one of the most expensive gaming acquisitions of all time, so this is definitely not something that you want to hear. But it does kind of feel like this has been a slow build-up these past few years. Sony originally attempted to be hands-off with Bungie, but these past few years, Sony has slowly taken more control because it feels like they no longer trust what Bungie is doing, and I think rightfully so. I mean, if you look even beyond Destiny 2, let's ignore that game for just a moment, because I don't think they have a ton of confidence in Marathon either. Its reception has thus far been very poor, and they were even caught red-handed just earlier this year for stealing art. So Sony ultimately decided to delay that game, and I think that's because they see all of the red flags. So they're just kind of trying to save it by this point because, frankly, they need Marathon to be a success. They spent billions of dollars on this acquisition, and this was one of the reasons. And who knows? Maybe they'll get things turned around. But right now, I think they're rightfully concerned and frustrated with Bungie. Let me just say this, though, because somebody in the comments yesterday basically asked me, or really accused me in this case, oh, well, you're praising Arc Raiders, but you constantly hate on Sony's live service plans. And that's actually crazy to me that was their main takeaway, because clearly you haven't been listening to what I've been saying on this channel for years. First off, Arc Raiders is not a trend for extraction live service games. Its success is a rare exception for this genre, and I'm going to praise it for that because it does stand out. Second off, let me just go and ask you a few questions. First of which, have I ever hated on Helldivers 2, another Sony-published live service game? Because that's a flat-out no. I've consistently praised Helldivers 2 on this channel because the success that it had, and also it's just a fun game that I personally own myself. Now, my other main question to you is PlayStation better at making single-player or multiplayer games? I mean, you don't even have to answer that because I think we all know the answer is more than clear by this point. So let me just make this crystal clear. What I've been saying these past few years isn't that live service games are universally bad, and that Sony should never ever try to make another multiplayer game again. In fact, if you've actually listened to me, I've said the exact opposite, but I'm going to go ahead and elaborate on this once again. I never once said that they should have 0 live service projects across the board, but rather my argument has and always has been is that their shift to live service has been too dramatic and too fast. They should have never put the majority of their budget into live service projects because they don't have the proven track record in that field to hedge that kind of bet. They don't have the eye, they don't have the talent to see what is a good live service game, and they have proven that time and time again. They have spent decades fostering a community that prefers their single-player games. And frankly, their first-party studios, for the most part, have not been very good when it comes to multiplayer projects. I mean, this dates all the way back to the PlayStation 3 days when they tried to find their own Halo killer, and it just never happened. So to me, instead of this 60% plus budget for live service games as opposed to their proven single-player games is a bad strategy. I feel like it probably should have been closer to 70-30 in favor of single player. I've said that multiple times. I'll go and say it again here. And if they would have done that, maybe we would be getting more than one blockbuster first-party game a year and less live service flops. And that's my last question to you, because do you think their pipeline for last year, this year, and next year is acceptable? Because I certainly don't. I've lived through all of the PlayStation generations, and I didn't pay for the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 5 Pro for all of this live service junk that they keep trying to make. I bought into PlayStation with the idea that they would continue their momentum from previous generations. But here we are with this new Jim Ryan and Herman Hulst mentality, which has not been successful even in the slightest, which once again has shown its ugly head in this Bungie buyout. It has resulted in flops, less games, and a ton of canceled live service projects. But you can go ahead and ignore that. But there you go. For that person that made that comment yesterday, I hope this answered your question. But let's just go and continue on with this disastrous acquisition that has been Bungie, because I said pretty early on that I thought this buyout was a mistake, because Bungie has one single successful IP that seemed to be on a decline, and it just didn't feel like it was worth a multi-billion-dollar buyout. Now, maybe if they would have paid less money, that would have been fine, or if they would have purchased it 10 years ago at Destiny's peak. But that's not what happened. And I think they're learning from their mistake the hard way. I think the only thing for me is, where is the accountability? It wasn't just Jim Ryan that put them in this position, because it's also people like Herman Hulst. He put them into this position as well. And by this point, I have zero trust in his ability to lead their first-party studios, which has been worse than what it probably has ever been. I really don't see how anybody can defend their first-party outing this generation. I mean, early on in the generation, I could understand that because I thought it was fine myself. But those were games that were likely greenlit by Sean Layden, not by Herman Hulst and Jim Ryan. But these past few years under their leadership, it's just not up to PlayStation standards. And I'm going to simply leave it at that. Rant over. At the end of the day, Sony definitely seems to regret the Bungie buyout. Now, one more thing before we go, though, because fans are furious with Nintendo right now, which, I mean, has kind of been a theme for the Switch 2. They have made some questionable decisions for sure, but this time it's in regards to their game keycard situation yet again. For whatever reason, Nintendo decided to drop an entire video to explain game keycards and how to use them. I mean, they could have dropped this video 6 months ago, but they didn't. So here we are, and not only are fans displeased by this video, it has a whopping 14,000 dislikes compared to just 3.5 thousand likes, which I think tells you everything that you need to know. But what makes this situation even worse is that the game that they use to highlight keycards is for Pokapia. Now, that is a pretty big surprise because it's a Nintendo-published game. And up to this point, Nintendo has not used a game keycard for one of their own games. But I'm going to go and tell you this right now. While I personally don't like game keycards, I'm always going to promote physical media, but I don't even think that this is the most egregious news from Nintendo today, because to me, the most egregious thing that they announced is that this same game, Pokapia, will be $70. Like, how in the world is this game $70? Like, I enjoy Nintendo products. I grew up as a Nintendo kid, and I'm also a massive Pokemon fan. But Pokapia at $70? I mean, I don't even know what Nintendo's doing anymore beyond just being flat out greedy. I mean, it's getting absurd by this point, and yeah, Pokapia just came an instant skip for me. Regardless, though, I do want to hear your all's opinions. I want to hear your opinion about this situation, both in price for Pokapia and also the possibility that it will be a game keycard. Let me hear it in the comments below. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.